What's up? Are you ready? Yesterday, I was at a 9/11 memorial service right here in Purcellville, Virginia, led by Mayor Frazier. And one of the guest speakers during that service was a guy named Art Castellano, who was a first responder on 9/11 who ran into the Pentagon. Now, I videotaped this literally like my phone was sitting on my camera, but it was such a powerful story that I wanted to put it in this vlog. And I hope you are ready, because by the time this is done, there will not be a dry eye in the house. And we must always remember, and we must always be vigilant, and thank God for our first responders. So here you go.
As I was driving, I actually heard a rumble next to my cruiser, and I was, if anybody knows Arlington, I was right next to the Navy Annex when I heard the noise. I looked over and I saw the plane going down and hit the Pentagon. I called it in and immediately responded to the Pentagon. Because I was a canine officer, I had a four-wheel drive, which benefited me, allowing me to get as close as I could to the Pentagon. When I got out of my cruiser, I started running towards the Pentagon, and it was pointed out to me later that when I was running into the Pentagon, there was people running out of the Pentagon. So who's the crazy person? I was. But as I got closer to the Pentagon, I saw saw arms coming out of the lower windows, people trying to get out. And there was numerous people at this point. Everybody was showing up and trying to pull people out. So the window that I was at, I could hear people yelling in the office. It was actually an office inside where the window was, and they were yelling, but they couldn't see because the smoke was so thick that they couldn't see their way out. So I started yelling to them to follow my voice, and I pulled out several people at that point, and one of the last ladies that I pulled out told me that there was somebody else in there, elderly gentleman, and they don't know where he went, but he was still in there. So I started yelling louder and louder and louder until I heard him, and I told him to follow my voice. And I wasn't able to reach, or I wasn't able to see in, but I started reaching and I felt somebody. And I actually, I grabbed a hold of his lapels of his jacket. I got him close enough to pull him. And when I pulled him, he screamed. And the reason he was screaming is because this is exactly where, when the plane hit, the jet fuel shot in. So everybody that was in that specific office got burned. And when I pulled him up, the reason he couldn't follow everybody is because he had actually got hit in the eyes with jet fuel, and he didn't have any eyes left. And I know that these are horrific stories, but these are stories that we need to remember. We need to remember that we were attacked, but it wasn't everybody that attacked us. It was a certain group of people. Anyway, I don't want to preach. After we pulled out all the people that we could out of that, I was concentrating on one window, we all kind of regrouped, and there was groups of fire, police, civilians. So there was a group of like 5 or 6 of us that decided we were going to go back into the Pentagon. And if anybody's ever been to the Pentagon, there's rings to the Pentagon, and there's like alleys in between each ring. So we were trying to make our way far enough into the Pentagon where the plane had hit to make sure that there was no either passengers or people that worked at the Pentagon still alive in that area. As we got to the third ring, I was the only law enforcement officer there, and my radio went off with a 3-tone. And a 3-tone is a dire emergency, and it was actually the plane that crashed into Shanksville. They thought was coming back to us and heading back towards us. And because all the fire had gone off, all the fire extinguishers, or all the sprinkler systems were all going off. In between the rings, there was at least 3 to 4 feet of water that we were walking through to try and get deeper and deeper. And when the announcement that we got on the radio was that the plane was several minutes out, and we knew we were too far in to make it out in time if the plane was actually coming. So what we did was we actually sat in between the rings, and we exchanged names and phone numbers. And the reason we did that is because if one of us lived, if this plane did hit us and then one of us lived, that we wanted that person to know, to tell our spouse where we were when everything happened. And luckily, I mean, for us, the plane wasn't heading back towards us. It was actually the plane that hit in Pennsylvania. So we actually did, as you can tell, we got out. So there was also a time where if everybody remembers, there was no cell service. Nobody had any cell phones, and everybody wanted to call. I knew my wife, my daughter they knew that I would be there. So but we couldn't call anybody. And one guy got through, and he put up his cell phone and said, "Anybody that needs a call, my wife's on the phone." So we all ran over, grabbed his phone, and gave our wife's name, our daughter's name, and her number. Tell them to call them to tell them that we were all right. So we were actually thinking, of other people, make sure my wife and my daughter know that I'm okay. On a side note, there was a lot of companies that after everything had settled down, I remember McDonald's, they weren't allowed to bring their truck in, but they shipped in, and it was from the McDonald's on Columbia Pike, they shipped in a bunch of Big Macs, fries, and it sounds silly, but that Big Mac tasted great. It was a long day, and they actually brought Metro buses, because if people remember, it was a nice day, but it was very, very sunny, and the people that were there, it was very hot. And they brought in Metro buses, and they turned the air conditioner on, so it actually gave us time to get into the buses and cool down a little bit. So after, we also, the NTSB, when they got there, they actually cordoned off the whole, what they considered the crime area. You weren't allowed to leave without checking in with someone from the NTSB or come in. And you had to be authorized to be in there. And the authorization was whoever was there when they got there. So they couldn't even let their own people in. So what they ended up having us do is to make a row and start walking, as there was like 20 or 30 of us in a row, and we were just walking across the lawn of the Pentagon, picking up airplane pieces, because everything needed to be recovered. So after all that was done, and this was probably about, by this time it was probably, probably 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night, I finally decided that I was done. I was tired. There was nothing else that I could do at that point. And I remember driving home on 66, and there was no cars at all on 66. I mean, nothing, which was an eerie feeling. And it was silent. I didn't even have my radio on. But I remember when I was on 66, there were people on the bike paths that go over 66 hanging American flags down. And what a feeling it made you feel. It made you feel like you did something not only for your community, but for your country. And I was never military, so I never actually felt like I contributed to the country. When I got home, I live in actually a court, and my wife had told all my neighbors what was going on. All my neighbors knew what I did for a living, and all of them were outside, which made me feel great. And everybody came over and hugged me, and the bottom line is I just wanted to grab a hold of my wife and my daughter and feel good. And our next door neighbors, they actually moved in the same day that we did. It was a new development, and they moved in the same day we did. And he was an Arab guy. And he came to me after everybody was, went to their houses, and he apologized, but he said, "Mr. Art, please remember that wasn't me." And it made me feel good that he was letting me know that it's a certain group of fanatics. It's not all Arabs. That's not the case. And people of Arab descent were just as hurt as we were. But it made me feel good that he had told told me that. Um, so anyway, you know, I went into the house and just to relax. And my wife knew not to say, I'm looking at my wife, is just crying. It makes me cry. But she knew just to let me relax. And the next day, you know, of course, my supervisor told me, Art, you don't come into work tomorrow. Don't come into work tomorrow. Well, I felt like my job wasn't done. So I showed up to work on time the next day, and they were giving jobs out for people. You know, you go here and do this. You go here and do this. And when they called my name, and I know that they weren't thinking, but they gave me the morgue. And I said, Sarge, I'm a man, but I can't do the morgue. So what they did was they put me on traffic detail, because I refused to go home. And when I was on traffic detail, there was a car with a lady and a younger girl that drove up, and they said, we need to get into the Pentagon. And I was very sarcastic, you know, ma'am, you're not getting into the Pentagon today. And the lady started crying, and she said, I need to go in and get my husband's car. He died yesterday. So, it told me it's not over. You know, and it wasn't over, and it's still, as you can see how I'm emotional about it, it's never over, and it's things that you live with in your heart. And everybody, especially law enforcement and fire, you all have something in your heart that you have to live with it. It hurts to share, but when you share it, it makes it easier.